I think there's things there that we don't know.
I think it is tough running for office. All right, let's talk about.
He had polling, by the way, that also showed, and there was polling within the party that showed that McInnes had a lead, and I think that shouldn't come as any surprise.
Look,
the fact that he was in Congress for a number of years. Yeah. His name ID was significant, even with I think some gains that Senator Penry had made. He felt he was gaining; it just wasn't there yet. And at that state, you know, you have to make that choice. Then.
Let's talk about McInnes. Now, I'm surprised that McInnes wants to be governor. My thinking is after 12 years in Congress, you'd want to be a senator. And he could have challenged Michael Bennet, who I also believe will be very vulnerable. But he wants to become governor. And I think there's some sense inside the party faithful, not the party elite, not the guys with the wallets, but the guys on the ground who stuff the envelopes and knock on the doors, that McInnes is, well, he's part of the old school Republican Party, the George Bush era, where they talk a good game, but when they're in office, they don't act the way we want them to act. But still, he's done a great job of chasing out every challenger, including Tom Tancredo, who looked like he might join in. What's Scott McInnes' biggest weakness in taking on the governor?
I think right now Scott McInnes' biggest challenge is to identify issues that he can run. How do I say this? He has a budget issue that he needs to deal with if he becomes governor, right? And he can't come out and say, I'm going to raise your taxes or raise your fees. Republicans will go nuts. So he has to find some way to address the budget issue, talk about things that he would cut, be realistic with Coloradans and let them know exactly what they'll get with him as governor without talking about how do you raise revenue, which is very difficult. Bill Ritter is okay with talking about how you raise revenue and cut to the budget. I also think Scott McInnes needs to introduce himself to Coloradans and let them know who he is as a person and let them know that he's a nice guy. As we've talked about, Coloradans want to like their governors, and he needs to become a more likable person. What those of us who pay attention to these things, I don't know him well. I've had coffee with him, talked to him on the phone once. But those of us who pay attention to these things watch the little things that have happened over the last couple of months, him going on Caplis and Silverman and, you know, having a tough time with, you know, Caplis of all people.
There was a complete meltdown for those people who missed it, where McInnes went on the defensive when they threw him some softballs, and he had a senior moment. It was not good.
I think you identified when you were talking and setting up Dan there, the problem that he's going to have, which the Democrats are looking forward to saying Scott McInnes, President Bush, Tom DeLay in the same sentence. I mean, that's why in many ways, if you talk to the kind of the progressive Democratic insiders, they would have told you they were more fearful of Josh Penry, because they didn't necessarily have, he was a new face, he was fresh, and while they could certainly target certain policies of his, the background, the legislative background of Scott McInnes gives them a wide open door, and you're going to see, I mean, it won't take long this year before you start to see the commercials with Tom DeLay's picture, Scott McInnes. I mean, we've seen that picture on some of the blogs already.
And even look at the picture that was in the paper last week. I wrote about, or excuse me, several weeks ago, I wrote about it in a column, that they announced this platform for prosperity, and who's in the picture? Governor Owens, Tom Tancredo, and Scott McInnes. They're building a bridge to the past. You can already see these ads happening. This is the GOP class reunion photo from 1996. This is not hope and change and offering something new to voters, which they said they wanted in 2008.
That is, I will agree, that's going to be Scott's biggest challenge. The one thing that I'll say is one of his greatest assets. This guy loves to campaign. It's in his blood. He has the same thing that Bill Owens had, the same thing that Bill Clinton had. I mean, he's got a feel for this stuff. He's the kind of guy, I've heard the stories that, you know, he knocks on the door of somebody's garage and he'll crawl under the car with him as he's changing the oil and talk to him. I mean, he loves that. He feels comfortable in that. And I think there's been a lot of Republican candidates that have not felt really good about that day-to-day glad handing that a politician has to do. Plus, he's going to be able to raise money. He's got a Rolodex from 12 years in Washington. He's got a lot of fat cats who are backing him. That's going to be a good thing.
He got the support of a lot of Democrats, too, when he was a congressman in that district. You know, I mean, if you go back there, a lot of people will say, I heard from one Democratic insider whose dad, a hardcore Pueblo D, basically said, oh, yeah, McInnes, he's a former cop, good guy. You know, I mean, that's kind of the reaction in his district that he still has, which, if that translates statewide, will be interesting to see.
Does he have a mustache?
Yes.
All right. I'm in favor.
Facial hair,
I want a guy with facial hair. If I took off my facial hair, people would notice I'm bald. It works, I'm telling you. All right, let's switch over to the Senate race, which also is just remarkable. Here you've got a governor who appointed an absolute unknown. Now, those of us who are junkies know Michael Bennet. Those of us who follow DPS understand Michael Bennet. But let's face it, nobody outside of the political world knows who Michael Bennet is. And with less than a year, really, to make his name, I don't think he's made made a name for himself as a senator. Furthermore, you've got one of the most politically savvy Democrats running against him in a primary, Andrew Romanoff. Now, Andrew and I disagree on absolutely everything, but I've got to tip my hat off. This is a guy who knows how to campaign. He's got no wife. He's got no kids. This is his life. This could be damaging for Michael.
Andrew's one of the rare people in this state, one of the rare political figures who inspires young people to the point where there's a former aide of his who actually flew in from Japan for his announcement. I mean, he has young people who will work their tail off for him. And
Did I mention how much I hate young people?
Sorry, you have
all that energy and ideals and
it's a rare
hair.
It's rare, and I think Michael's going to have Senator Bennett's going to have a challenge with them. He's got a lot of money, which he's can got a lot introduce of money, and himself. But
Romanoff does not have.
But you figure in a primary where you have inspired voters, it's going to be interesting to see how many people actually vote in that primary in August. That's going to be the challenge. That the fewer people who vote, I think the better it serves Andrew Romanoff.
I would agree with that, but I think a lot of people are going to vote. Andrew inspires the party activists. When the governor appointed Senator Bennet, we received a letter to the editor from Senate District 23's chairman. I didn't even know Senate District 23 had a chairman. I knew they had a senator, didn't know they had a chairman. So there's this whole layer of party activists out there who were upset by this, thought Andrew Romanoff should have had the pick or gotten the pick. There's not that many of them. Michael Bennett's going to have tons of money. He'll run a general campaign for the primary, just like Pete Coors did, who had a ton of money when he was running against Bob Schaefer. Bob Schaefer inspired the party activists. They went out into the state assembly, and he won top line 80-20. Pete Coors barely made the ballot. I'm not sure he even did. If you remember that election, they found some ballots or whatever, right? And Andrew Romanoff will do the same thing. He'll win top of the ballot at the state assembly. He'll go into the primary and lose 70-30 because Michael Bennet will spend.
Yeah, Mike Miles did the same thing
to Salazar.
To Salazar. Yeah, you've got people who attach more to the party faithful, but when it comes to the general primary,
but you blanket the airwaves. You spend a ton of money. You introduce yourself to general election voters through the primary. I think this ends up benefiting Michael Bennet. And the other thing it's benefited Michael Bennet on is he's had to define himself because he has this primary challenger from Andrew Romanoff. We had Michael Bennet in for a meeting earlier this spring, and we asked him about health care. What do you think of a public option, Michael? Well, I can see a bill with a public option. I can see one without. Well, are you going to vote for it? Well, I can see myself voting for it. I can see myself voting against it. And you get a challenger in Andrew Romanoff. Suddenly he's like, we need a public option. I'm going to vote for this bill. I'm going to, even if I lose my job.
Even if I lose my job, I'm going to vote for a public option.
But it defines him and toughens him up. It makes him ready for a general election. I think it's good for him. I think it's good for their party, and I think it's going to make him a better challenger or a better contender in November.
It's going to be a hot one. All right, let's switch to the Republican side on this one. I'm surprised that there isn't more interest in the Republicans that are running. Of course, Ryan Frazier, African-American city councilman who had a great following, decided to jump out of that race. He's going to run in the 7th instead against Perlmutter. And so you've got some folks that don't have a whole lot of state ID, including Ken Buck, I know, is running, Tom Weens, former state senator, and of course, Kay Norton. Jane Norton. Oh, it's good. There's so many Nortons. Gail, Jane,
Trixie,
Tom,
Norton.
Trixie, Bob. All right. So Jane Norton is running, and she seems to be the odds-on favorite right now. One, because she's a whole lot prettier than any of the others, but it seems as though she's been blessed. Their images among a lot of Republicans, she's been blessed by the party elite.